In the know, nonstop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com. Purple Daily, presented by Surly Brewing Company.
And welcome in to Purple Daily, daily Vikings entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. And you can't win Super Bowls without drafting football players to fill out your roster. So, maybe a step in the right direction. We'll break it all down here. Mackie Judd, our executive producer, Declan Goff, and the show, as always, presented by our friends at Surly Brewing Company and TCL, one of the world's best-selling consumer electronics brands. They have a new lineup of award-winning TVs delivering the most entertainment with stunning resolution, all at an affordable cost. Enjoy more of the things you love with TCL. Before we get into just sort of the big picture recap of the Vikings draft here, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's first draft as an NFL general manager. How are you guys feeling today? I think we did, I want to say 15 hours of live streaming and podcasts recapping the Wolves and the Vikings draft, the Surly draft party a couple nights ago. How are we holding up today here, boys?
I honestly am so set to go Monday night at the X. Dex and I earlier today, Judd's hockey show, breaking it down. Seriously, I am revitalized. The Wolves are done now. And as I explained, thank you very much, as I explained on a Evening Judd video, the Wolves and Grizzlies appetizer. It was a good appetizer. I'd like an app. What do you got? Bring a couple apps, right?
Little calamari?
The old Roycey thing. Bring us 3 calamaris, 2 of those nacho plates.
We'll do 6 bunny bowls, some of the garlic bread, and 4 plates of calamari. Oh, and throw in some of the pierogies.
And a Surly for Judd, and then come back for the order, right? So now the order is up. And I got the menu. And the menu starts, as Declan and I talked about, Monday night. So I actually am not only not tired, I am rearing to go here.
Okay.
Dex,
are you alive? How are you doing?
I'm alive. I personally slept in till 10:30 today. It was great. I don't think I've slept in that late in months. So I'm revitalized and rejuiced here. And yes, like Judd, I'm ready for the NBA playoffs. Also
NHL playoffs.
NHL playoffs. And to a degree, I guess the NBA playoffs.
I'm still in on. I'm still very much in on the NBA playoffs. Scouting players the Timberwolves can trade for and get rid of D'Angelo Russell. That's another episode.
But yes, I'm very excited to break down this draft, and also a little housekeeping thing. Tomorrow on the Purple Daily YouTube channel, I would love to talk with Vikings fans about this draft. So if you'd like to be a part of that episode, shoot me an email. VikingsVentline@gmail.com. I know you guys want opinions. We're going to keep it just us 3 for this episode. But if you have thoughts on the draft, I'll gladly host tomorrow on this YouTube channel, probably tomorrow afternoon. Shoot me an email, VikingsVentline@gmail.com, and we'll go from there.
I think Maya the Monster out here, she's got some takes on what happened in this draft.
She's all in on the Seahawks draft. She wants to talk Seahawks draft.
It was a great Seahawks draft down the street. So, all right, well, the Vikings rounded out day 3 of the NFL draft. They did go more offensive heavy today than they did the first 2 days. So they wind up, we'll just do kind of a big picture thing here, but there's a couple interesting themes that are worth pointing out. So they went 5 defensive players in their first 6 picks. So they went very defensive heavy in free agency, and they went very defensive heavy the first 6 picks of the draft. The only offensive player was Ed Ingram, the guard from LSU. Speed was a theme, right? Lewis Cine, one of the faster defensive backs, probably the fastest safety in the draft. You're going to find, Ty Chandler was the running back they took today on day 3 from. He spent 3 or 4 years at Tennessee. Then he was at North Carolina, ran for 1,000 yards last year. I think he ran like a 4.38 40-yard dash. Asamoah posted a good 40 time. So speed was definitely a theme here. But I'm going to throw one nugget out, and you tell me how much it concerns you, okay?
Okay.
So the consensus big board across all of Mock Draftville. So there's a website called mockdraftdatabase.com where they just pull from all of the credible mock drafts throughout mock draft season. Mm-hmm. And they put together a big board of where, and actually this is more of a big board. There's a mock draft consensus, but then there's a big board consensus.
Sure.
Of the 9 picks, right? They made 9 picks. They traded
10 picks.
I might have missed someone in here. Of the 10 picks they made, I'm leaving Jalen Naylor out here. He was 191 overall. I think the only one that they drafted above slot value consensus board was Andrew Booth. So Lewis Cine, and again, does this mean that it was a bad draft? Time will tell. Lewis Cine was 32nd on the consensus big board. He was drafted 32nd. Booth was 24th on the consensus big board. He was drafted 42nd, so great value according to consensus. Ed Ingram, you drafted him 40 slots earlier than the consensus. Asamoah, you drafted him almost 30 slots before the consensus. Caleb Evans, you drafted him 22 slots before the big board consensus. The Gopher edge rusher, Isizi, you drafted him 60 slots before. So, according to the consensus big board, the Vikings reached with most of their picks. Do you care about that? Do you care about the consensus big board?
I care a little bit. Like you said, it's hard to get worked up about like the overall general, like who knows, right? So here's some questions I've got off of your question. So my answer to your question is I care a little bit. Like I'm not going to be pounding the table because of that. But I've got questions, and included in my questions are this. It feels like they clearly have decided that some pieces that I sort of like from the 2021 draft class or would have given a chance to don't fit. For instance, Ty Chandler ran a 4.3840 at the combine. So he's a very fast running back. Well, Wongwu was too. So, like, does that mean that you're out on him, that you've moved on? Like, I don't know, but I'm just asking the question.
I think that one is more looking into the future. Alex Madison is a free agent after 2022. And it's pretty unlikely the Vikings, who are going to have money tied up in Dalvin Cook still for the next 2 or 3 years, maybe they trade him at some point. Alex Madison probably hits free agency. And so they might not view Wongwu as a reps guy. They might view him as a return guy and more of a gimmick player or like a trinket player you can diagram some plays for. I mean, Wongwu's not really, even in college, Wongwu wasn't really line him up in the backfield and hand the ball off. So if Dalvin Cook goes down, let's say in 2023, and Alex Madison signs somewhere else, you need someone that has experience taking a handoff once in a while. And that wasn't really Wongwu in college either.
Yeah, and it also feels like this draft, with all of the trades, that they might have gotten too cute. By that I mean this. So they had, going into Thursday night, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 draft picks, okay? By the end of the draft, they had made, of the 10 picks that they eventually got, they had made 2 picks, both in the 6th round, at the slots that they were originally intended to. They made, by my count, and I might be wrong here, 7 different trades with 6 teams. They traded with Detroit, they traded with Green Bay, they traded with Indianapolis within the first 2 days. Then today they traded with the Raiders, and Cleveland. At some point in time, I think you could be outsmarting yourself to move up and take guys who, to your point, Phil, were graded below where they took them. And here's my last thing that I'm not a huge fan of. The Ed Ingram pick, okay? Just from a optic standpoint, if you go and look up on Google the Deadspin piece that we touched on last night, and I went and after we got done last night, read it. And then I read that Kwesi basically wouldn't reveal much about the decision or about the background of the pick, just said, we did our due diligence, we're comfortable. He was accused of a significant, and it got dropped, but I mean, he was accused of a significant crime. And I guess I'm a little bit leery of the fact that Kwesi is like Mr. Man of the People, and we're transparent and we're open and we're collaborative until the going gets tough. And then it's like, well, we're not going to talk about that. You got to, in my opinion, you got to sort of pick your path there. You're either, I'm not going to talk about it, or I'm Mr. Friendly, and now I'm not answering your questions. That bothers me a little bit just as a first blush. So like, I'm not saying that this is the future. I don't know. But if you're asking me to sort of break down big picture, what I saw, what I think, that at least sets off a little bit of a bell and whistle to me. Because, I mean, Ed Ingram was not accused of shoplifting from his Tom Thumb, you know? Like, it's one thing if you're accused of something that's like, okay, that's a dumb childish thing. This is concerning a little bit. So anyway, those are things that stood out, but I would defer to what you said, and I do agree. Like, as far as passing overall judgment on the draft, we don't know. We never know. Like, I'm not going to sit here and lie and be like, well, the 7th round pick wasn't good enough. So those are the things that sort of stood out to me as a big picture takeaway.
Mm-hmm. Dex, what's your overall takeaway here?
From the draft itself, I mean, obviously Scene's going to be a day one starter. Booth, potentially, right? Like, I don't think it's a lock he's a day one starter, but should slot in if we were recklessly speculating on how the depth chart rolls out. Probably is maybe a starting outside cornerback when it's all said and done. I find it interesting, though, that with them going defensive heavy in the first half of this draft, which doesn't surprise me, I am surprised that they have basically banked on the fact that the offense is fine as it is, and there isn't anything that we really need to add to it. And I know they have a guard that they could potentially plug and play as the right guard, and they have a lot of competition there, so that's great. But they have looked at the Vikings offense for 2022 basically as it's hasn't reached its potential yet, and we're not even going to add a new flavor to it. Now, that might be the right call, but I do think it's a little interesting that they're basically not really adding anything of significance to that offense. And let's be honest, even with Mike Zimmer and both Kubiaks running the show here the last few seasons, that offense hasn't reached its full potential of being a top 5 offense, which it should be. And I think it's an interesting gamble to not add to it and just say, no, we just have to tweak a few things, and that's how we'll make it a top 5 offense.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of said off the top of the show, but the limited resources they had in free agency, the bigger bucks went to defensive players, and then they patchworked a couple defensive spots. You have, Chris Reed looks like he's going to start somewhere along the offensive line, but that was for a couple $1 million. And then to spend 5 of your first 6 picks on defensive players, it's very obvious they said, all right, we're gonna bring in all kinds of new defensive personnel, a new defensive scheme. We're gonna run a 3-4 for the first time in 30 plus years with the Vikings, and then hope for some regression in just how bad the Vikings were in the final 2 minutes of the first and second halves. And to Declan's point, they haven't done much to change the offense personnel wise. You're gonna get Irv Smith back. Oli Udoh's not going to start at right guard. I think if the season started today, Garrett Bradbury is your starting center. They did not draft a center, which is interesting. Yep. So is Chris Reed the backup center? Is he going to start at right guard and then he's the backup sort of emergency center, or does he start at center and Garrett Bradbury becomes a backup and they start one of the young guys, maybe Ed Ingram or Wyatt Davis or somebody else at right guard? But Kevin O'Connell came in here and said, and I think we all agree, I can maximize this a lot more than Clint Kubiak and Mike Zimmer if we just run the personnel back mostly the same. Let's get Oli Udoh out of here because he's in over his head. Mm-hmm. But that's the biggest theme here. They don't have to be done adding players because there are still some interesting free agents. My guy, J.C. Treader, would be a nice cherry on top of all of this. So there's still a thing or two that you can do, and you do have a little bit of cap space. But this is basically the Vikings roster, and the biggest additions were defensive players. And offensively, the biggest addition is Kevin O'Connell, right?
They are convinced, right or wrong, that Kirk Cousins can become a legitimate Pro Bowl, Super Bowl caliber quarterback with the right guy. Like, I mean, I thought that, but I thought they might get him a little bit more. Like, why not get him more? I mean, there's no like, well, you can't have another wide receiver because the rules don't allow that. But they basically are confirming what we've talked about, I think, which is they think that Kevin O'Connell can not just exceed what Clint Kubiak did with Kirk Cousins, but also what Gary Kubiak did, also what Kevin Stefanski did. I mean, they are saying Kevin O'Connell and this offensive system will turn Kirk Cousins, will clear up all of the things that we have what's the right word? Complained about, criticized, critique. They are saying he will fix that. I have no idea if they're right or not, but I mean that's legitimately what they are saying. And they did get him more help. I mean the offensive line now. If they're going to decide Bradbury is the guy, you guys, I do think the offensive line it's not good enough. I think it's gone. I think that's gone from all of our arsenals. Us, the Kirk stands. I think we all need to agree that on opening day of training camp in late July, that we all agree that this offensive line is just flat out good. Like I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to hear it. They've decided they have Kirk's best interest in mind, right? As far as we know. So I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to hear, well, Bradbury, I mean, he got, if he gets thrown into the 15th row at Soldier Field, hey, this is their guy.
On paper, I have another thought here too. Just one thing I really like actually about this Vikings draft, but on paper, the Vikings offensive line should be a lot better. So think about where we were at this point last year. So right after the draft last year and after free agency, it's like, God, they didn't really do a whole lot to fix the offensive line again. And so they go into the season, and Darisaw was coming off core surgery. He's a rookie. We didn't really even see him until like a third of the way through the season, right? So so the left tackle was completely up in the air. Oli Udoh was an experimental right guard. And Brian O'Neill was basically the only solidified option. Ezra Cleveland, I think people had hope for. So tons of question marks going into last year, which was inexplicable, by the way. Why would you go into the fourth year of Kirk Cousins in a win-now season with all those question marks?
Sure.
It's not that the question marks have been eradicated going into 2022, but I think you still feel good about Brian O'Neill. He's one of the top 10 right tackles in the NFL. I feel really good about Darisaw, especially the last 5 or 6 games. Go look at the Pro Football Focus grades. He played some games against San Francisco, the Rams, where he only allowed like a pressure or 2 pressures per game against some really good defensive fronts. So I feel better about the tackle situation than I have in years, going back probably to the first year of Matt Khalil. Ezra Cleveland, not spectacular, but he's like a league average left guard, and that's fine.
I'm not going to. Yes.
And we already talked about Chris Reed. He's just a solid veteran right guard that's going to come in and hopefully be league average. So it's not a perfect offensive line. The Bradbury thing still makes me nervous. They're going to have to find, because they're not going to pick up his fifth-year options. They're at some point, and they didn't do it this draft, they're going to have to find a long-term option at center. But yes, on paper, the Vikings offensive line should be quite a bit more settled than it was at this time going into training camp last year.
And I think what you said last night is correct. I think Reed now is probably going to compete with Bradbury for the starting job at center. Ingram's a second-round pick, you guys. I think he probably needs to start. Like a second, because we thought Wyatt Davis coming in last year as a third-round pick, which is a high pick, might have a chance to start. So from what Thornton told us last night on the podcast, I got to think that the intent right now is that Ed Ingram is going to start at right guard. Reed is going to now compete, because that the center position is the only one at which I think it's mandatory that there's competition, and perhaps the competition at right guard is Davis and Ingram. So I can't see them not having, if you're not going to pick up the 5th-year option on Bradbury, it doesn't make sense not to at least compete there.
Yeah.
Like, it makes zero sense.
What is, and pardon me for not having done the dive on this yet, but Chris Reed has experience playing some center, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I'm, if you think Ed Ingram, because he's a second-round pick, and you're right, like, you draft a guy in the second round, you're priming him to be a starter at some point. You don't draft him to be a backup, right?
Right.
Does he compete with Cleveland? Does he compete at right guard, or does he start at right guard and Chris Reed slides over to center? And maybe they're going to just figure all this stuff out starting minicamp.
So I bet, just a total guess here, I bet the competition at center is Bradbury and Chris Reed. I bet the competition at right guard, in this order, Ingram 1, Wyatt Davis 2, and then who's the guy that they signed who's a swing backup guy?
From the Dolphins last year. He was graded as one of the worst offensive linemen in the league, but he's better at guard than he was at tackle.
But anyway, so I bet he's 3, and I bet he's the swing guy. But I bet the hope is that it ends up being Ingram at right guard, Cleveland at left guard, and then Wyatt Davis and or Reed or both end up being the guy that could back up there and center. So
the point here is they have options. It feels like they've got some options here.
My point is this. I am not going to sit here and say they have screwed up the offensive line again. it doesn't feel like they have.
Yeah. And and we've brought this up a few times. The Rams had no Pro Bowlers along their offensive line last year.
Yeah.
And the Rams were number 1 in the NFL in pass block win rate. It's about the collective. It's about not having a weak link. It's less about having 3 Steve Hutchinsons, and
everybody works together, right? I also think that this is the final indication, and I sort of had this feeling before, but I think it's finally official now too. In their minds, in Kwesi's mind, in the Wilf's mind, in Kevin O'Connell's mind, Mike Zimmer didn't care by the end about offense, right? He started to meet with Kirk, but he didn't really enjoy it. So he didn't care about offense. And this is going to sound harsh, but to me, the draft and the free agency period prove this out a little bit. Their feeling is at the end, he was incompetent defensively.
Yeah, and he was. Yeah.
No, but it sounds harsh because that was his ballywick. That was his first love. But I think that's the message. Yeah. He was incompetent defensively, and they let it get away.
Yeah. So, okay. One thing I really like about this that I know we kind of fought about this, me versus you guys last night, that you guys weren't in love with the trade backs, although trading back up for Booth kind of changed the discussion for both of you guys. But this was widely regarded as a sort of flat talent draft. There wasn't top-end quarterback talent. There wasn't a consensus on, these are the 5 best players and they're going to go in the top 5. It was like you can kind of put 10 or 12 players in a hat, and there wasn't elite top-end talent in this draft like other drafts, but there was a lot of talent between like middle of the first round all the way through the 4th round. Mm-hmm. And the Vikings obviously felt that way because one of the main goals was going in and trying to get more picks in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th rounds. So they went into the draft with 4 picks between the 2nd and 5th rounds. Or let's include the 1st round too. They went in with 4 picks between the 1st and 5th round.
Yep.
And they wind up making 7 picks between the 1st and 5th round.
Yep.
And instead of making 3 6th-round picks in the 7th, they make 2 6th-round picks in the 7th. So they just, I think they did a great job, and we'll see where it pans out with some of these players, but they did a great job of maneuvering and trading back and accumulating extra picks within the 1st through 5th round range where the most talent was in this draft. And they weren't obsessed with trying to stockpile 6th and 7th round picks like we've seen with Rick Spielman in the past. I really like that tactic. Did they get the right players? We'll find out in time.
And to your point from before, the comeback to that is, well, but they reached for a ton of players according to what the draft said. Yep. I just see, again, look, if I don't like something, if I think a team's wrong, I think it's fun to talk about, and there are fans in this town who get very upset about that, and that's awesome. The draft is one though, like once I get past the philosophy, it's impossible, dude. We could talk about Ty Chandler should have gone earlier, should have gone later. Who really knows that, right? That's where it turns into a crapshoot. I guess what I really didn't like about the first 2 trades was the fact that if you consider the draft to be a crapshoot and you consider it to be potential lottery tickets, you allowed 2 of your prime foes, including the Packers, who are your biggest foe, to take players at positions that could absolutely hurt you. I don't like that. But yes, Phil, you're correct. The Booth trade back up. I was apoplectic at first. You weren't at all. And the Booth trade back up calmed me down because that seems like a good pick.
Yeah, Booth was, according to the consensus big board, Booth was the highest ranked player that they drafted. So he was 8 slots above Lewis Cine on the consensus big board. I think PFF had Lewis Cine as 23rd, and Booth might have been a little bit below that, but they were both like first round graded players.
Yep.
So the picks that people are that the mocking community and the guys who study this in and out for a living are scratching their heads a little bit more about. People feel like it was a reach to draft Brian Asamoah with the 66th overall pick. And I think there's some people scratching their heads about Ty Chandler a little bit too, just because, well, you already got 3 running backs on your roster, and you reached 20 picks, before his consensus big board slot. But I don't know. I think Kwesi clearly has a certain way about modeling the draft, and he has a certain way of going about the draft value trade chart too. He's not using Jimmy Johnson's draft value trade chart.
Right.
It's hard to sit here and say one way or the other that he had a great draft or a poor draft. We have to. I think the only thing you can say is if they believed that there was a ton of talent between the 1st and 5th rounds, then this was a great draft for them on paper because they wound up with 3 extra picks than they started with between the 1st and 5th rounds. So, bravo.
A little bit surprised that they did not go receiver until their second to last pick with Jalen Naylor, Michigan State at 191 in the 6th round. That surprised me a little bit. Like I thought that they would. Well, we talked about a potential 1st round pick at 12 there, but I thought that they might add one more because I think at the end of the day with O'Connell, and I don't know if I'm right about this, but I feel like that's a position at which the depth chart can't have too much competition. Like I feel like it's incredibly important. And I'll give you a pick that I like a lot as far as positional value that was debated about the Vikings. I like the fact that their last pick is a tight end. Like if they had taken a tight end 3rd round or 4th round, I'd be like, you're not going to use a tight end that much. Like look at the Rams. Irv Smith might be a hybrid, but like you're not going to make an ordinary tight end a focal point, right? So I guess I'm a little bit surprised they didn't go wide receiver quicker to try and, because I mean there were a ton of them to try and add competition. But I do like the fact that they just basically at the end said, we'll take a tight end now. Because I don't think the 2 things is I do not think the fullback and tight end ultimately beyond an Irv Smith type of guy are going to have much of a role offensively for Kevin O'Connell.
Nick Muse is the name of the tight end they drafted from South Carolina, and he's. I'm going to go on. I'll read his scouting report to you guys. I'm going to go on a limb and say that he's more of a blocking tight end. He got 20 passes his last year in college, so he also played. He played a handful of games at William and Mary as a freshman. Then he transferred to South Carolina. Athletic tight end with good size, ability to be flexed around formations. He's a willing run blocker at the point of attack. That's right.
I'm flexing around the formation in my room here.
You should stop doing that, actually.
I didn't. It's not like I showed you my chill boys.
He's average at uncovering within the route, but lacks the length and hand talent to consistently win contested catch battles.
Football. We need that
Hand talent, Tech?
and the length.
He drifts through his route breaks.
Football.
So that's
Needs
not
to
good.
connect his feet with his hands as a run blocker.
My
Football.
problem.
Oh, so he's Carl Anthony Towns.
From about 11:45 p.m. to bedtime. That's usually an issue.
He's
for
got
me
the
with my
cat.
hands and feet,
He's got the cat strut.
You guys want more scouting reports?
Hell yes, I love scouting reports.
They're the greatest because I try to figure out what they mean half the time. And I do love the fact that Thor Nystrom, who knows more about this than any of us, could not interpret one last night.
It's got to be hard to write those because you're literally writing 400 of them, and you got 20 bullet points on each of them.
But I mean, Thor Nystrom breaks down the entire draft, right? Like he's a spot on. He's a great guest. He's fantastic. I literally asked him, "What does that mean?" And he's like, "Well, I'm going to guess."
It kind of reminds me of like a play-by-play, mostly hockey guys, and I used to do this when I did St. Cloud State hockey, that I would just put down on a piece of paper like 6 to 10 adjectives that like I would like to mix in throughout the broadcast.
Emmerich?
Doc Emmerich.
Doc Emmerich.
And
he knifes his way through the neutral zone.
Shuffles the puck, slides the puck,
Waffle
glides the
boarded.
puck,
Waffle board.
pitchfork.
chips the puck.
Pitchfork.
Pitchforks
I
the
love
puck.
pitchfork because
It's
you
the
know
same
what?
thing.
You pitchfork the puck a lot.
Right. It's the same thing with draft guys. Like they mix in these adjectives. I swear that. Oh, can I
I know
use
you
that
did
one?
that. That's awesome,
5
Nick.
away. I tried.
Okay, Vidarian Lowe. The Vikings drafted Vidarian Lowe from the University of Illinois. He's an offensive tackle. They picked him in the 6th round. And according to NFL.com, he's big, strong, and durable. That's good. Bendy with adequate lateral quickness.
Lateral
Football.
quickness.
That's really good for a tackle.
Very important.
You want quickness.
He runs feet to stick and wash down opponents as a zone blocker.
Football.
So he comes with a hose?
Yes, he actually has a super soaker.
Super
He just
soaker,
kind of carries
yes.
on him. Yeah, he's packing a super soaker.
Yeah.
Rips pass punch into opponent with snap.
Football.
Pass,
what?
Punch into opponent.
Read that again,
with
please.
snap.
Read the last one again.
He rips pass punch into opponent with snap.
Rips, pass, punch.
Another way to say that might be Baldy coming in with
Watch this throw here to Cameron Brayton. Little quick jab.
quick jab.
Bam. Little punch. Knock him off bounds. You got to change it up. You get the predator off bounds, and then you dance.
Brian Baldinger doesn't just like football, he loves
Yeah.
football.
On the weakness side, pad level rises a little tall out of his stance, and he leans and drops his helmet into contact.
Football.
Who writes these?
His post foot deadens when sliding to inside counters,
Football.
and he needs to sit down and find footing to anchor.
Football.
Gotta have that anchor.
This is courtesy of Lance Zierlein, NFL analyst for NFL.com.
Executive producer Declan Goff. Next year we have to get him on.
We had him
before
on.
the
Oh, yeah,
draft.
we've had him on.
We had him on.
No, but I
last
mean
year.
just talk about the write-ups.
Just the write-ups.
I don't want to talk about the prospects. I want to talk about these these write-ups are great. Can you imagine Lance Zierlein describing a day in the life of like Declan Goff?
Oh, I would pay if he should do a cameo or a Patreon account of just him where he does that for normal civilian.
Where like you can have your
Lacks
day scouting-
snooze button discipline before
Yep.
7 o'clock
But I mean,
a.m.
think about how you would describe that, like, because you'd have to describe it for like 18 people.
works hard until adversity is in his face.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Uh,
touch. Yeah, this is great.
Okay, Ty Chandler, the running back who ran a 4.38 here. The Vikings drafted Ty Chandler with the 169th pick, 5th rounder.
Go.
The NFL.com write-up says, follows blocks and uses them as shields.
Football.
Oh yeah.
Stays low and coiled to absorb and manage run contact.
Football.
Attacks linebackers down the seam and catches through heavy collisions.
Football.
Okay, on the weakness side, leggy strides slow quickness out of downhill cuts.
Football.
I had that issue in track in 8th grade.
Lacks suddenness getting in and out of cuts and takes time to process the lane and hit the gas.
Football.
Who
Gas,
doesn't?
baby. All brakes.
Who doesn't?
No brakes, all gas. No brakes, all gas.
And unfortunately, play pace needs to quicken through the line. Otherwise, it's going to be tough.
Football.
Yeah, but that's why if you get him in space, don't have to worry about the line.
What happens when you get Judd in space outside at Surly Brewing Company?
Well, here's what Judd does. He makes a draft pick. And when Judd's making draft picks, there's only one first overall pick. And let me tell you right now, Vikings fans, I ain't trading it. It's the Surly Furious IPA. Although on Thursday, and thanks again to all of you that showed up, it was a great time. The Before I Die brew, we do have to get that back once more at least.
We need to make that happen.
Like
Absolutely.
that wasn't, I'm not joking and I'm not being a shill when I say that beer was outstanding. Our guy did a great job. Like that was phenomenal. So anyway, what happens when you get me in space at Surly Brewing is I head to as many taps as possible, and you should too. And if you can't get to Surly Brewing, that's okay because your local liquor store, well, that should carry Surly as well.
Amen. All right. Any final thoughts from you guys on a 2022 Vikings draft in the books here?
I'm just really curious for the season. Like I there are certain tendencies I didn't love about this, but again, I'm not going to critique like the depth of the players. I don't know. I don't think I think the experts don't know. But I'm very curious to see where this franchise is going. And I'm also, part of it is based on this. There are, all kidding aside, a lot of people with a say here. Like, I think Kwesi has the final say, but there's no question, and they should. The coaching staff does. You've got guys like Ryan Grigson, who is the GM with the Colts, who's definitely got a big say. So I'm just curious to see where things go. Declan, you're drafted twice by the Saints.
I am.
Three times. This guy drafted
3 times.
Declan
You didn't
3
draft
times.
Phil at all.
I was
You drafted me
undrafted. I have to
first.
prove myself as an undrafted free agent. Yes.
I'm Wyatt
I-
Davis.
I like the fact that they are going to try to address this defense and over the long haul get it back to where it should be. Just on the offset of what I said at the top of they're trusting that this offense just has to be tweaked. There's nothing that has to be added to it. There's no flavor. There's no missing ingredient necessarily. It just has to be prepared differently. And I'm curious if that's going to work. If Chef KOC and his boys can cook up a good enough meal here with that offense. A little salt, a little pepper.
I mean, they could have a little more pepper on this offense, right?
You know, like for example, I love I'm not a big regular barbecue guy, but I love Southern barbecue because they're vinegar-based and not mayonnaise-based like here in the Midwest. Like Midwest is as mayo-based barbecue. Well, then I tried vinegar barbecue-based stuff, and I was like, oh, wow, I never knew this existed. And it opened my eyes to a top 5 food item, just like I want the Vikings to be a top 5 offense.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll eat pretty much any kind of barbecue.
I was
That's true, though, too.
I mean, Declan's like, no mayonnaise-based barbecue. Yeah, I'll take any type of barbecue.
Whatever you want it, yeah. Okay, if the Vikings sign J.C. Treader, I give the offseason an A. If they don't sign J.C. Treader, I'm still not in love with the offensive line enough to say that it's an A offseason. So I'm like, what they did in the draft, I think, is impacted to me by what they could still do in free agency here to help for the 2022 season. But it's hard to argue if you're looking to fix your secondary. It's hard to argue with Andrew Booth and Lewis Seen with your first 2 picks. Beyond that, a lot of question marks, a lot of speed, and we'll just have to let it play out. But if they were going in to try and fix a tattered secondary, then they definitely did their job. And if they were going to go in and try and stockpile picks between the 1st and 5th rounds, they did their job there too. So
I think the defense has a very good chance to come back and be pretty damn good.
Yeah.
I will say this. They have, and I hope they prove me wrong, they have more faith in Kirk Cousins than I do.
All right, Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative.
They
You
do.
couldn't
No, they
you
just
couldn't
do.
you couldn't have just let the episode slide
have-
without a Kirk Cousins dig,
no,
could you?
No, because they think
Had to
they
throw
can
that
make
right
him
in there.
something I don't think is fair to him. Much
What do you
like
mean not fair to
Goodwill
him?
Hunting, Kirk, it's not your fault. Kirk, it's not. I think they think that Kirk can turn into a Super Bowl caliber quarterback with their coaching, and I don't think that's possible.
Yeah. I'm here, and yeah, I think Kirk is on the same level as Matt Stafford? I don't. Do I think he's probably maximized his upside in the NFL as a 4th round pick that wasn't highly touted high school, college? Yeah, I think we're kind of seeing the best of Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
Am I as offended now as I was a couple months ago that they're trying to run this thing back? Like if they're going to run it back, they've done a pretty good job in some certain areas, and so I'm going to let it play out. And if they wind up with 8 or 9 wins again, then we can do the I told you so party in February next year, January, February.
I am waiting for July when a big golden chalice is heading down 94 in a convertible with a bunch of hockey players holding it.
Well, you gotta get by the Blues in the first round first. That might be the hardest series you play. Well, Colorado.
You know what this is about, Phil? It's about effing winning.
Okay. All right, Judd's Hockey Show you can find as a podcast and also on the Score North YouTube channel. All right, boys, that's a wrap. Go get ourselves into some trouble here tonight. Dex will be
Who's
back
got barbecue?
tomorrow with a little Vikings vet line.
Yeah.
And then you might think, oh, the draft is over. You guys must take. No. This is a daily show, 365 days a year, and we will have plenty of things to talk about starting. I mean, the real off season starts next week. Like, there's not really an off season until after the draft, but then the schedule comes out in like 2 weeks. So we're gonna be all over that. Well, yeah, we'll mock a schedule. Send us your mock schedules. We'd love to see them. Yeah. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us. Daily Vikings entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.